I was 22 years old, lying in a hospital bed with a chemo drip in my arm, when my father looked me in the eye and told me that my medical bills were becoming a burden on the family's long-term goals. He didn't say it with tears or a heavy heart. He said it with the tone of a man discussing a bad investment at a board meeting, and then he walked out, followed by my mother, leaving me with a stack of discharge papers and a 0% chance of survival without their support. I spent the next 2 years fighting for every breath, fueled by a cocktail of experimental drugs and a cold, hard rage that eventually led me to the moment I stood on their doorstep, staring at the man who left me to die, and delivered a 4-word response that stripped him of his dignity and left him absolutely speechless. Have you ever been discarded by the people who were supposed to love you most when you were at your absolute weakest? Or am I the only one who has had to learn that blood doesn't make you family? It just makes you a target. To understand how we got to that doorstep, you have to understand the dynamic of the Miller household. My father, Richard, was a self-made man who worshipped at the altar of optics and legacy. Everything had to look perfect. My mother, Eleanor, was his loyal lieutenant, more concerned with her standing in the local country club than the actual well-being of her only son. I was the golden child as long as I was winning trophies and getting into top-tier universities, but the moment I became inconvenient, the mask slipped. It started with a persistent cough and a fatigue that I couldn't shake off during my final semester of college. I thought it was just stress, but the diagnosis was stage 3 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. When I first told them, they were supportive, at least in front of others. They posted on Facebook about the family's toughest battle and gathered all the sympathy points they could. But behind closed doors, the atmosphere was different. The treatments were expensive, even with insurance, and because I was too sick to work, I was entirely dependent on them. My father started complaining about the cost of the specialty clinic I was at. My mother started making passive-aggressive comments about how they had to cancel their summer trip to the Mediterranean because someone needed a new round of immunotherapy. The breaking point came 6 months into my treatment. I had just finished a particularly brutal round of chemo that left me unable to keep down water. I was weak, bald, and terrified. That evening, Richard and Eleanor came into my hospital room. I thought they were bringing me a change of clothes or maybe some news from home. Instead, Richard sat in the chair by my bed, cleared his throat, and told me that they had decided to restructure their financial priorities. He explained that my sister, Chloe, was planning a destination wedding and that they had a responsibility to ensure her future was secured. Since my prognosis was uncertain, they felt it was unwise to continue depleting the family estate on a gamble. They had paid for the current month, but after that, I was on my own. My mother wouldn't even look at me. She just fidgeted with her designer handbag. I asked them where I was supposed to go, how I was supposed to pay for the meds that kept me alive. My father just shrugged and said, "You're an adult, Leo. You'll find a way. We've given you the tools to be resilient." They left me there. They actually left me in a hospital bed with no home to return to and no way to pay for the next week of care. I didn't die. That's the part they didn't count on. I spent the next year in a nightmare of social workers, state-funded clinics, and the kindness of a distant aunt who took me in when she heard what happened. Aunt Martha wasn't rich, but she had a heart. I worked odd jobs online whenever I wasn't puking from the meds. I survived on grit and the singular desire to outlive my father's prediction that I was a bad investment. Slowly, the cancer went into remission. The bills were astronomical, but I didn't care. I was alive. And then the universe threw a curveball. A small tech startup I had consulted for during my recovery was acquired by a major firm. Because I had taken equity instead of pay, knowing I might not live to see the money, my shares suddenly became worth millions. For the first time in my life, I had more money than my father ever dreamed of. I bought a house, I paid off Martha's mortgage, and I stayed silent. I didn't reach out to my parents, and they certainly didn't reach out to me. In their minds, I was either dead or a destitute burden they had successfully pruned from their lives. But then came Chloe's wedding, or rather, the collapse of it. Apparently, Richard's investments hadn't gone as well as he hoped. He had leveraged their home to maintain their lifestyle, and the long-term goals he had abandoned me for were crumbling. They were facing foreclosure, and Chloe's fiancé had called off the wedding after realizing the family wasn't the gold mine he thought it was. It's funny how people find their way back to you when you're the one holding the checkbook. They found out about my success through a mutual acquaintance, and suddenly my phone was blowing up. Apologies, explanations, claims that they were testing my strength, or that they were going through a mental health crisis themselves when they left me. They wanted to meet. They wanted family healing. So that is the situation I found myself in. I was healthy, wealthy, and finally free of their shadow, but they were knocking on my door, crying about how much they missed their son now that they needed a few $100,000 to save their house. Before I tell you exactly how that final confrontation went down and what those 4 words were, I want you to pause right here. Think about what they did, leaving a sick child to die because he was too expensive. Now, tell me in the comments, what would you do? Would you be the bigger person and help your parents to keep the family together? Or would you let them feel the weight of their own choices? I really want to know if you think there's any coming back from what they did. I decided to give them the meeting, not because I wanted to help, but because I wanted them to see exactly what they had thrown away. I invited them to my new home, a place they could never afford. When they walked in, they were fawning over the art, the view, the sheer luxury of it all. My father tried to clap me on the shoulder like we were old pals. He started talking about how we could fix the family's current liquidity issue, and how he always knew I had that Miller spark in me. My mother was teary-eyed, talking about how she prayed for me every night. It was the most disgusting display of hypocrisy I had ever witnessed. I let them talk for 20 minutes. I let them lay out their debts, their fears of losing the country club membership, and their plan for me to move back into the fold. When Richard finally stopped talking and looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to pull out a checkbook, the room went silent. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just looked at him, the man who told a dying boy that he wasn't worth the money. I stood up, walked to the front door, and held it open. He looked confused and asked, "Leo, son, what are you doing? We're talking about the future." I looked him dead in the eye, my voice as cold as the hospital floor I once slept on, and I said the 4 words that ended our relationship forever. The investment didn't pay. The color drained from his face instantly. He knew exactly what I was referencing. He remembered that day in the hospital. He tried to stammer out an excuse, but the words wouldn't come. My mother started to wail, calling me heartless, but I didn't budge. I told them that since I was an adult and they had given me the tools to be resilient, I was sure they would find a way to navigate their own uncertain prognosis. I closed the door on them, and I haven't looked back since. They lost the house. They moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of town, and Chloe doesn't speak to me because I didn't save the family. But for the first time in my life, I am truly healthy. I learned that you can't put a price on a human life, but you can certainly put a price on a toxic relationship. My life is worth everything, and their presence in it was worth nothing. If you think I did the right thing by letting them face the consequences of their own cruelty, like this video to show your support. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about people getting exactly what they deserve, and please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. Do you think I was too cold, or did the punishment fit the crime? I'll see you all in the next story.